discrimination, based on disabilities. Again, this was in 1990. Yeah, it was. We were kind of nervous about it being in an industry. We just didn't know what was going to happen. Of course, you thought, boy, they're going to come in and make us immediately remodel everything and make us immediately, put in an elevator and do all kinds of things. And while those would probably have been great, they would have been extremely expensive and they would have created an undue burden. And so that's not how it worked out, and ADA became, I think, a pretty good law in terms of, hey, when we're building new things, when we're remodeling things, when we're doing things, we ought to just do them the right way. When we're doing that, in the middle of doing things, there's other parts to the law. Don't get me wrong, and there have been some contentious parts, but for the most part, I think it's been a really good change. Okay. The pre-employment medical exam or medical history. Well, what happens there? Well, the answer there is because you can be required to have a medical exam before you start working. We see this in sports. Oftentimes, you'll see somebody get traded, and they'll say, but it's pending a medical exam or whatnot. And what happens is this: if you're doing it properly as an employer, you conduct your interviews, your hiring process, your recruitment and selection. You make your selection, and then you can, after you've selected somebody, require that they have a medical exam and that they meet, if you have requirements of your job. And pick a job that's really strenuous, maybe firefighter, right? And I'm sure that there are medical exams required for firefighters so that they're able to perform the job without risking themselves. And so what you do is, again, you'd go through the selection process, you'd pick somebody, and then have the medical exam at that point in time. So no discrimination based on disability or past disability, or regarded as having a disability. And so some of these definitions get to be, a little bit complicated, and I can't tell you that they're black and white. These are a lot of gray areas, right? What's considered a disability is something that's a substantial limit to a major life activity. Walking, seeing, hearing, okay, those types of things. But things like PTSD and those types of things are definitely starting to be considered disabilities as well. Okay. And again, this does not affect bona fide occupational qualifications for certain positions that, just have requirements that people have to meet in order to perform the job. Okay, so disability, again, can be physical or mental. So what's a reasonable accommodation? Process of adjusting job or work to fit the needs of the employee. Our tellers, for example, at the bank, they stood up pretty much all day. Well, what if you had somebody who had a bad knee or something and I can't stand all day? Well, would it be a reasonable accommodation to provide them with a stool where they could continue to work even on the stool? Well, of course it would. Okay. And so those types of accommodations are things that you need to take a look at. Okay. And that's a pretty simple example. There are obviously bigger accommodations that take place as well. One of the big things that's coming up in this area, of course, is genetic information. And there was a Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. And what's that mean? Well, we can take genetic tests, right, to determine maybe what our propensity is for certain diseases, et cetera, or conditions. And what if your employer were to obtain that kind of information, maybe as a part of your job? Okay. Folks at IBM, they developed a lot of this, and so they were kind of testing themselves, to see what was happening. Well, what if it said, geez, you're pretty likely that you're going to get, lung cancer at the age of 40? Golly, maybe IBM doesn't want to keep you around, right? And so, we've kind of gotten ahead of ourselves, hopefully a little bit here, and it says no discrimination in employment can be based on an individual's genetic information or a family member's genetic information. Okay, so it kind of frees you up then if you're interested in having those tests, not worrying about it. IBM, when they did this, and this was prior to any kind of government action, they made it a policy in their company. They said, we absolutely will not discriminate based on any of the results that we might get from some of these genetic testing and whatnot. So, and employers may not request that information, but again, some of the companies, especially those that actually work with it, So discrimination in health insurance, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and some of these have changed, and honestly with the Affordable Care Act and whatnot, I probably haven't kept abreast of some of these changes as well as I should have, but you can't be denied employment if you're if you have some health issues, and because your employer is worried about what that might do to the coverage that they pay, especially maybe smaller employers, right? No excluding from insurance coverage or requiring different premiums, right, based on employee's health status, medical condition, or history, and those, right. So again, if you make that hiring decision, okay, and you do that without regard to their condition, then if they meet the, if they pass a health exam that you may need, again, it might depend on the type of employment. Then you can't discriminate. Even if they're going to cause your premiums to go up as an employer. State anti-discrimination laws. Again, we do have a state human rights commission or human rights bureau that acts like the EEOC, and so we certainly have some of those same cover some of those same issues, but I can't say that our laws differ substantially from what the federal laws are when it comes into those things. State tort and criminal law, right, may be utilized, certainly. What are we seeing? Surge in private lawsuits. So you go back to that EEOC chart that I showed you and how the EEOC enjoins some of those. What happens when the EEOC says that you as an employee, they don't really feel that you were discriminated against, and I've seen this at the more at the state level, where the Human Rights Bureau would make an examination, and then they send out what's called a right to sue letter. Okay, and it basically says that we don't think your case has merits, but that doesn't prohibit you from availing your rights within a court, or availing a court for your rights. Gosh, bad grammar again, sorry. Anyhow, so you can always take that claim to court and see how a court might react or how a jury might react. And we're seeing a surge in those. Okay, discrimination based on genetic testing. Not that we're seeing discrimination surging, but we're just seeing that issue come up, right? Because those things are happening. Arbitration in discrimination disputes. So we're seeing more and more companies, actually, we saw that when we talked about alternative dispute resolution, that more and more companies are requiring arbitration clauses. And then insurance against discrimination claims, absolutely. If your customers preferred male drivers, does their preference mean that the company can hire only male drivers? If you could prove, it's kind of the Hooters thing, right? Okay, if you could prove that had a huge impact on your, bottom line, maybe. It might be the answer there, but again, it's a maybe and it's a gray area. There you have it, Chapter 20. Talk to you next and last week.